Over the last several days, the minority leader has again continued his unprecedented partisan interference with the business of the Senate Judiciary Committee. In addition to these partisan interventions being unwelcome, many of the minority leader's assertions are just plain false. Other assertions omit significant context. So, as I've done several times here in recent days, I'm here to correct the record. So let me start by reiterating that the confirmation process for Judge Kavanaugh will be the most transparent in history. That's from the availability of all the documents that are out there for our colleagues to study about this nominee. Senators already have access to the most important part of Judge Kavanaugh's record, his more than 300 opinions written during his 12 years on the D.C. Circuit. In addition to the hundreds more opinions he joined and the more than 6,000 pages submitted in connection with his Senate Judiciary questionnaire. Moreover, the Senate will receive more pages of executive branch documents than the Senate received for any Supreme Court nominee ever. I anticipate up to 1 million pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time in the White House counsel's office and his service on the independent counsel's office, along with records related to his 2006 confirmation to be a judge on the D.C. Circuit. The production could be larger than the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined. Hence, you understand why I'm saying this will be the most transparent confirmation process of any federal Supreme Court justice. The other side is pretending like the most expansive and transparent confirmation process in history is not good enough. Despite this expansive and transparent confirmation process, and that senators already have Judge Kavanaugh's entire judicial record in front of them already, Democratic leaders continue to make unreasonable demands for more and more documents. In fact, they demand access to every email and every other document ever written or received by every staffer who ever worked in the Bush White House. They want these records to fish for documents that merely mention Brett Kavanaugh's name. In other words, they essentially want access to every document that ever went through the Bush White House. Now, this is really beyond unreasonable, and it's not a very serious proposal. During Judge Kagan's confirmation, then Chairman Leahy was adamant that documents merely mentioning Justice Kagan's name shouldn't be produced. And this is just one example of Democratic leaders not following the Kagan standard. The motive behind the unreasonable demands for documents is obvious. Democratic leaders want to stall Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation any way possible. They hope to bury the Senate in mountains of irrelevant documents to delay his confirmation hearing and perhaps deny him a vote during this current Congress. The ranking member's hometown newspaper reported this scheme over the weekend. the headline read something using the word stall. So the San Francisco Chronicle called it, quote, a tactic that could postpone a decision until after the midterm elections, end of quote. The article explained that, and I quote again, the Democratic strategy is to demand to see every document that crossed Kavanaugh's desk while he served as President George W. Bush's staff secretary from 2003 to 2006. In other words, the Democratic leaders are demanding these documents in order to needlessly delay the process rather than for legitimate purposes. But these tactics aren't going to work. Let me address some of the minority leader's specific points. He says that traditionally, the Senate Judiciary Committee sends a bipartisan letter requesting documents. And he said that we should have sent out this letter 2 weeks ago. What the minority leader fails to point out is that my staff worked extensively with the ranking member staff to attempt to identify specific staff secretary records that might be of some interest to the Democrats. But the Democratic staff wasn't interested in a reasonable compromise, including my attempts to get them even more documents than the up to 1 million pages of documents that we're already in the process of receiving. After multiple rounds of negotiation, the ranking member staff still hadn't budged from their position that they're entitled to access any of the millions and million pages of documents that ever went through the Bush White House. These demands were unprecedented, were unreasonable, and were obviously intended to delay the confirmation process. I couldn't allow this tactic to further delay this important business of the committee, so I sent a records request for the White House counsel documents as chairman because we need to keep this process moving. We can't be stalling. It's unfortunate that the ranking member didn't agree to sign it because the letter requested documents that both sides agreed we should have. Both sides agreed with the documents that were in my letter, but no signature from the minority. Then the minority leader, Senator Schumer, also says that we should have followed the precedent established during Justice Kagan's nomination. In suggesting this point, he is rewriting history. He may not know that, but he is. He conveniently forgets that both Democrats and Republicans agreed that we shouldn't repeat documents we shouldn't request documents from Justice Kagan's time as Solicitor General. Everyone agreed that the Kagan's security Solicitor General documents were too sensitive for disclosure and in fact could chill the candidness of internal deliberations for future presidents and their counsel, their Solicitor General. This same respect for confidentiality should apply with greater force then to staff secretary documents, which include some of the most sensitive policy advice going directly to a president, in this case, President George W. Bush. Indeed, the White House staff secretary is essentially the inbox and outbox for the President of the United States. Now, that's not to say that it's not a very important position, but it doesn't get involved in much policy. The Senate's current task force is to evaluate the qualifications of Judge Kavanaugh, not to relitigate every political and policy disagreement from President George W. Bush's 8 years in the White House. As my Democratic colleagues keep pointing out, Judge Kavanaugh has described how his time as staff secretary was a formative experience for him. Well, Justice Kagan said the same thing about her time as Solicitor General. But in the case of Kagan, the Democrats refused to request her records. On top of the undisputed relevance of Solicitor General's material, Judge Kagan, however, lacked a judicial record. In other words, unlike the more than 300 opinions that Judge Kavanaugh authored and the hundreds more opinions that he joined in his 12 years of service on the D.C. Circuit, Justice Kagan had 0 judicial opinions that she offered, 0 judicial opinions that she joined, and 0 years of judicial service. Her Solicitor General documents were therefore even more relevant. Democratic leaders then are rewriting the Kagan standard to further their stalling tactics. The minority leader also tried to draw a parallel or parallels with the request for documents from Justice Sotomayor's time as a board member of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. This, however, was a narrow request closely tailored to a specific need for information. It resulted in the production of approximately 100 documents, not millions of documents that are involved with the White House staff secretary. In contrast, Democratic leaders demand access to every single one of the millions and millions of pages of emails and other records from every one of the 100 staffers who served in the White House with Judge Kavanaugh. As I have said repeatedly, I will not put the American taxpayers on the hook for a Senate Democrats' fishing expedition. Clearly losing on the substantive arguments, the minority leader has even resorted to personally attacking Mr. Bill Burke, President George W. Bush's attorney. Mr. Burke has been one of President Bush's designated representatives for the Presidential Records Act, going way back to 2009. He is a leading partner in one of America's most respected and I think most liberal law firms. And I'm told that he has insisted that no lawyer be selected to participate in the review of President Bush's White House papers on the basis of his or her party affiliation or political ideology. Moreover, Mr. Burke has taken the time to personally meet with the ranking member staff and answer all of their questions about the document review process that I'm describing to you here. The minority leader said at a press conference today that the review by President Bush's lawyers, quote, wouldn't be so bad if we also got a full set of documents from the archives, end of quote. Well, that's exactly what I expect to happen. In other words, a full set of documents from the archives. President Bush has offered to give us access to copies of documents that we requested from the archivist so that we on the committee can quickly begin our review of Judge Kavanaugh's record while the archives works through our document request. The minority leader could have learned this by simply having a conversation with me instead of putting on a political show in front of TV cameras earlier today. I must also address the minority leader's unprecedented intervention into the business of the Judiciary Committee. The minority leader is not a member of that committee. We're not going to let him run the committee. I'm chairman of that committee. He has no business inserting himself into the committee's business, including the manner in which the committee will obtain the documents needed to review Judge Kavanaugh's record. But last week, he sent a letter to President George W. Bush asking him to release all records from Judge Kavanaugh's service in the White House, while at the same time criticizing the way that President Bush has chosen to review those records. This letter was an inappropriate attempt to meddle in the committee's business, and I'm disappointed that my Democratic colleagues on the committee are tolerating that sort of intervention. I have also learned that the minority leader called the archivist on Monday and asked him to, quote, unquote, do the right thing with regard to the documents. I was disappointed to hear that the minority leader was attempting to pressure a government official, one appointed by President Obama, can you believe, with regard to the committee's business. I also want to address one argument that my colleague on the Judiciary Committee, the senior senator from Illinois, has made. My colleague believes Judge Kavanaugh misled the committee during his 2006 confirmation hearing when he said he was not involved in developing the Bush administration's detention and interrogation policies. The senior senator pointed to a media report that described a 2002 meeting in the White House in which Judge Kavanaugh advised whether his former boss, Justice Kennedy, would accept a legal argument about American citizens' access to counsel. These allegations have no merit, and here's why. Offering advice on the potential success of a legal position suggested by others, meaning others in the White House staff secretary, does not show involvement in developing detention and interrogation policies. Multiple sources have confirmed that Judge Kavanaugh wasn't involved in developing detention and interrogation policies. Moreover, these allegations were already referred to the Department of Justice, which concluded that they didn't even warrant opening an investigation. I will further point out that this 2002 meeting occurred while Judge Kavanaugh was in the White House counsel's office, and as I have explained, the entire Senate, or at least the entire Judiciary Committee, is going to have access to Judge Kavanaugh's White House counsel records. In short, I'm proud to preside over what will be the most transparent confirmation process in history. As they have said publicly, Democratic leaders are firmly opposed to Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation. And they have also said they will do whatever it takes to defeat Judge Kavanaugh. They would like to bury the Senate in a mountain of irrelevant documents to delay the confirmation process as long as possible. And as you can tell from my remarks today and my remarks 3 or 4 times since Judge Kavanaugh was appointed, I'm not going to allow the minority to abuse the process. I yield the floor.